Let's turn to the person next to us and say, God bless you this morning. I hope everyone had a very restful sleep. Thank you everyone for coming bright and early to join us for a very full day of our 2024 K-Church Disability Conference. We start this morning with a bang. We have a very special speaker who's here all the way from Chicago. Her name is Jenni Von Tobel. We waited a year actually for her to come speak with us. 작년에 저희가 제니를 초대를 했었는데요. 그때 임신 중이어서 she gave birth to a very healthy baby girl, and she'll be talking about her daughter Everly a little bit later today. But she wasn't able to join us last year, and so we are very, very, very grateful to have her join us this year. Jenni and her husband, Paul, they serve Willow Creek Church in Chicago, Illinois, one of the largest evangelical churches in the country. She brings nearly 30 years worth of experience in disability ministry, and she is going to share some of those experiences and her knowledge with us today. Please give her a warm round of applause as we welcome Jenni to the stage.
Thank you. That's a lot of pressure. I'm not sure if that's all true, but I am really, really excited to be here. In fact, I woke up this morning with so much energy, and I want to say it's because I'm really excited to be with all of you, which is true, and last night being all together and listening to the pastor speak and doing worship just gave me so much life. And I have 5 kids at home, and I got to get on an airplane yesterday by myself and sleep in a hotel room yesterday by myself. So I have a lot of energy this morning, which is good because I have a lot to talk to you about, and I will speak fast. But first, I want to invite my friend Abigail up here. Is she still in here? She will be back. Okay. So a couple of things. Let's see if this is working. It's not working. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the new path of accessibility. And that's sort of about the modern day version of how we can remove barriers and provide access to everybody who enters our buildings. But before I do that, there is not a PowerPoint in your book with my information, so if you want to get a hold of me, I love talking with different churches, and here is some of my info. I'll put this on at the end too. Oh, there she is, Abigail. Do you want to come pray for us? Yeah? Okay, come on up. This is my friend Abigail, who I just met, and she wanted to open our morning in prayer. Here we go. Okay, so I'll hold this.
Dear Jesus, thank you for today. We love you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Abigail. I feel better. I always like to start with prayer. So this is my family. That's my husband Paul and my 5 children. I have 3 older girls and then a surprise little boy. And then last year gave birth to Everly, and we'll talk a little bit about her today. But I get asked a lot, how did you get in this field? And I started 30 years ago tutoring a little boy with autism. And this is 30 years ago, before everybody knew what autism was. And I just fell in love with watching him feel successful and feel seen and feel known. And then I became really aware of the whole family dynamic, the marriage relationship, the parents' relationship with the sibling, as well as with the little boy with autism. And I was 14 at the time, and every job I've had since then has been in the field of disability. And, Alex asked me to share a little bit of background, and really my story is that God is so good. And his goodness has just become something that I have seen woven throughout all of our experiences. And it has to do with what we're talking today as far as accessibility. And so I want to just share a little bit about the path. So after college, I worked at a residential facility called Lamb's Farm. There were about 200 residents who lived there. They all had intellectual disabilities. And this was a beautiful facility, and they cared for everyone's physical needs and their emotional needs and their recreational needs, everything. But my coworker, his name was Paul, he noticed that their spiritual needs were never addressed. So he was in seminary at the time, and he would go get a van at the facility on Sunday mornings and drive through and just pick up anyone who wanted to go to church. And as Jeff said last night, that was pretty much everybody. And so at some point, I think because he needed another driver, he invited me to go with him. And I went in and we got to the church, and that morning the pastor was talking about the Apostle Paul. And all of the friends with disabilities would kind of elbow each other and laugh and point, thinking that they were talking about my coworker Paul. And I don't remember if he ever told them that he is not, in fact, the Apostle Paul. But I do remember being so moved in watching this group of individuals learn about Jesus, and then over time take steps in their faith with Jesus, be part of communion, and get baptized and share about their own faith. And I was really smart, so I married him, so I married Paul, and we've been together, it'll be 20 years next year. And yeah, I think that for him, because he's home with all 5 kids right now. So from there, I went to a place called Gigi's Playhouse, which there's one here in Orange County. I think there's 50 of them now. When I started, there were 2. And it's a Down syndrome awareness center. And my job there was to help support families when they received the diagnosis of Down syndrome for their child, either before birth or right after birth. And probably, maybe 100%, but at least 99% of the families that I talked with, their stories started with, "I'm so sorry your child has Down syndrome." Every doctor that told them that, every therapist, however they got the news, it always started with, "I'm so sorry." So my job as a 20-something was to say, "Congratulations, you're having a baby!" Because that's what you say when someone's having a baby. You don't say, "I'm so sorry." You say, "Congratulations." And what I saw happen was the filter of every experience that these parents would have went from this sad, dark, worried filter, you know, which is what you have when someone says, "I'm so sorry," and then you think everything is going to be bad, to, "Oh, there is joy, there is life here, there is beauty in this." And you know, there is a way to get to the goodness of God in all of this. And when I was at Gigi's Playhouse, Paul went and worked for Johnny and Friends, as the pastor spoke about last night, Johnny, Erickson, Tata. They're based here in California. And he worked at the Chicago office. And he was helping churches take their first steps in disability ministry, 20 some years ago. And then he also ran a camp for families affected by disability. And I would join him at these camps, and I was so hopeful to hear positive stories, because this was a faith community, all of these families were believers, and I wanted to see what the flip side is of the "I'm so sorry" story. But unfortunately, their stories were just as negative, if not more so, because their stories were related to the church. They would go to a church and be turned away. and never with bad intent. These were bad people turning them away, right? And I think that's what makes it hard, is they were people that said, I love you, but you can't be here. We can't serve your child. He's too loud, or we don't know how. But there's another church over there, maybe try that one. And the same words could be said in, sorry, you're not welcome here. And when that is said from a doctor, it's one thing. When it's said from a church, it's hard for us to separate our faith from that experience, right? So church pain is a really hard pain to work through. And so these families, Johnny and friends, we were watching them experience the goodness of God at this camp together with people who saw them and loved them, and their children with disabilities and their children without disabilities. But they had to work through all this pain from not having a church community. And so if you skip through a bunch more years, Paul and I both ended up at Willow Creek together. And so the reason I'm telling you about this path is I think it set us up for one day last summer when I woke up. It was a Tuesday morning, and I could not wake up my, at the time, 2-year-old son. And I went to his crib and I picked him up, and he was limp and he was drowsy, and I just couldn't wake him. And so we rushed him to the emergency room, and after many tests and a very expensive ambulance ride to a children's hospital, we learned that he would be okay. And while we were sitting in that hospital room, I got a ping on my phone, and I opened it, wasn't really thinking about it, and it said, you have new test results. And I was probably 4 months pregnant at the time, 5 months pregnant, and was having blood work done all the time. And so I didn't think too much of it. I just opened it, and the first line said, it's a girl. And I was like, oh, God is so good. And then, although I did want a boy, and then before I even told Paul, I scrolled down a little further, and it said, she has trisomy 21, which means she has Down syndrome. And I'm not kidding when I say Paul and I laughed. And we were able, in that moment, to say, God is so good. And to experience that news, knowing that this is what it would look like, right? And the reason we were able to have that experience is because of this whole path, right? And we had all of these stereotypes just broken down, these barriers that bring us to see the goodness of God in some of these experiences. They were taken away from us. So the stories that I heard from all of these moms at churches in my house, where they would cry and cry in the shower, and they would, pray that maybe the doctors were wrong. I just heard yesterday someone told me that there was a woman in their church who was about to give birth to a baby with Down syndrome, and she was begging everyone to pray that the doctors are wrong, that she doesn't have Down syndrome. And I understand that. And so when I say that we laughed in the hospital room, it didn't come without fear, right? But that's my 15-year-old daughter, the older one, holding the baby. And who do you think is scarier, my 15-year-old or my baby with Down syndrome? It's my 15-year-old, right? So, don't talk about it. But, so, there's scary things about all of our children. We don't know what's going to happen with any of them. And it just does such a disservice to our families and our community to start them with a filter of negativity, because it prevents them from seeing the goodness of God. It prevents them. My story is not common, where we were like, yes, she has Down syndrome. That's not very common. But she's so cute, right? And one of the things that we've learned, though, is that these other emotions, I asked some of my friends, and this is what they had all felt when they first get the diagnosis. of whatever, disability that their child has, autism, anything. And so many of the words were blame. They blamed themselves. I had one woman who said she believed it was her fault because she had had a Diet Coke in her when she was pregnant, which just makes no sense, right? But nobody told her that wasn't true, and so she just had all this blame on herself from it. And so these are the kinds of things that prevent us from getting to experience the goodness of God in our life. And I want to talk about today how we can play a role in that. And so, because it's a very familiar storyline, it's the same thing from the Bible with the 5 friends, and they created this accessible path to get to Jesus, right? And you know the story as the 4 friends and the paralytic. But I like to call it the 5 friends because the word paralytico in the original Greek actually means looseness of the limbs, weakness of the limbs, and typically refers to the knees or the legs. So for some reason, if you grew up in church, especially I would say the American church, all the pictures in the storybook Bible has this paralytic as just laying on a mat, immobile, right? Can't do anything, and we just picture that. From the neck down, he can't do anything. But there's really no reason to believe that. And there's actually a good number of articles and research from different theologians on this, that there's no reason to believe he had anything other than weakness of his legs and couldn't walk. And so I like to call it the 5 friends because I think they created this accessible path to Jesus together. And you know the story, right? So these 5 friends, they hear that Jesus is coming to Capernaum. We don't know if they're from there. And so they decide they're going to go. They're going to go to Capernaum. They're going to bring their friend. And then they meet their first barrier, right? They get there, and there's this big line of people. And they're like, no, you can't come in. We've waited here all night long. Go to the back of the line. And so I imagine these 5 friends, they go, maybe sit under some tree in the shade, and maybe the 5th friend, the paralytic, says, I don't care if we have to dig a hole through the roof, I'm going to meet Jesus today, right? And then one of the other friends maybe says, they're familiar with this is a fishing town, they're familiar with some of the houses and how they have stairs that go up onto these thatched roofs, and so they decide, okay, let's try it. Let's dig a hole. And so first they'd have to go out, right, and they have to be creative and figure out, okay, how do we dig a hole? It's a fishing town, maybe they get some knives, some rope to lower him down, something to dig the hole with, and then they meet the next barrier, which is the stairs. And so they have to carry their friend up these stairs. But all of those tools that they gathered has to go somewhere, so I imagine that 5th friend is holding them, right, participating in this effort. They get up to the roof, another big barrier, they have to dig this huge hole. So they all start digging. Maybe the friend is digging with his hand or his arms. There's no indication that those didn't work. At the very least, he's certainly encouraging his friends, saying, if you can get to Jesus, I will cook you dinner tonight. Please keep going, keep digging that hole. And they finally get it big enough and they lower him down. And I imagine that the next barrier may have been the biggest barrier of all, and ironically from the people most proximate to Jesus. I imagine they didn't appreciate having whatever the roof is made of falling on their heads and all the noise of the digging while they're trying to listen to Jesus. But Jesus welcomes them, right? And he says to the friends, your faith has healed him. And so there's a whole training on how we can help remove barriers, but I actually want to talk a little bit about the attributes of these 5 friends. Now the thing is, in today's world, the modern version of the paralytic is a little bit different. Here in the States, at least, physical accessibility is protected by law, right? All doors have to be the width of a wheelchair. If there's stairs somewhere, there's ramps, or an elevator, and that's the law. But if our friends can come into the building unhindered, but then they're overwhelmed because of the lights or the sound, or they don't understand the teaching in the way that they need to understand it, then are we really being accessible? Are we really being inclusive? Because the modern day paralytic would be what we would call our friends with autism, with sensory processing disorders, or intellectual disabilities, even trauma. You process trauma you process sensory information in the same place that trauma affects you. And so if you have a child who is having a really hard time with lights and sound, it could just be unprocessed trauma. A lot of times we won't get to know what the diagnosis is, but we can help mediate these barriers. Because inclusion isn't just inviting someone to the circle, right? It's creating a circle where everybody can participate. But sometimes that means we have to make a square. And I think a lot of the workshops today will be about how do we make that square? How do we, modify things in our spaces and in our teaching to allow everyone to access what it is we're trying to say, what it is we're teaching about that day. So I wanted to first just go through the attributes of these 5 friends, because I see us as that, as these 5 friends working together. And if you know anything about sort of like Jeff was saying about professors, a lot of speakers have to use acronyms, right? So we have an acronym for 5, F-I-V-E. And the first one is fearless. And so these 5 friends, they were fearless. And I don't mean didn't have fear, I mean they had courage, right? When we got the diagnosis of Down syndrome, I still had fear. And actually my very first thought was, how are my kids going to react? Are they going to be embarrassed? Are they going to be mad? And I was so worried about them. And then I heard my 10-year-old telling her friend, my mom's having a baby and she's Down syndrome. And the friend said, what's Down syndrome? And Piper, my daughter, said, oh, it means she has an extra chromosome. And the little friend said, what's a chromosome? And Piper said, I don't know. And then they just moved on. And I was like, okay, they can handle this, they can do this. Another time, I told her, you don't have to tell everybody that I'm having a baby with Down syndrome if you don't want to. And she said, why wouldn't I? The Down syndrome is the best part. That's her superpower. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And that's what we often see with our friends that have some type of intellectual disability, is that it actually is their superpower, right? Like the whole strength in the weakness. So some of the fears, and you talked about it, you heard about it yesterday, but are liability, budget. One thing about liability, I unfortunately had a front row seat to a parent and a church's biggest fear, right? And I can tell you that the liability is way more expensive if you're not putting your safety protocols in place first. So if you're going to welcome and include people, which is what we're here to all do, any kid with or without special needs, any vulnerable person with or without special needs, we just need to make sure all of our environments are safe, right? So that's a very important thing. Budget constraints, I had a whole thing about this, but then my friend Jeff last night said, when somebody asks me, and somebody says, it's going to be too expensive, Jeff asks them, well, how much is it going to cost? And they say, I don't know. And I think that kind of sums up the whole thing, because there's many things are free, and nobody is asking churches to create, a state-of-the-art sensory environment. These are just little changes that we can shift that will include everybody. I had somebody ask me once, why would we change our room and the way we do things when it works for 99%. And without being sassy, I said, well, because Jesus did, right? He went after the one and brought him back. And so that is a really a key part of why we do this, right? We have that example in Jesus. So fearless is the first one. The second one is innovative, which really means creative. And innovative and creativity, this is the fun part. This is the fun part. This is the part where people get so upset and say, he won't sit still. He won't, he gets up every time we're walking around the room, he just gets up and keeps going. And that's when we get creative. Instead of saying he's a problem to fix, we think outside the box, like, okay, if he has whatever need it is that he needs constant movement, then after worship time, have your small group be over in that back corner. And then take the long way to get there, right? And then in the middle, maybe ask him to go be the helper and go get the markers over on the other side of the room. There's different ways that you can incorporate what we consider a problem to solve if we can shift it to their superpower. Like his energy also makes him the perfect worship leader, right? In a high school setting. So he's up on stage worshiping and jumping up and down. And so these are the kinds of things that we can get creative about, innovative about. And the good news is we don't have to dig a hole through a roof. So it's a little bit easier in that sense. The next one, V, is value. And if there was only one letter, it would be this one, right? None of the things that we're going to learn today, or that you learned last year, or that you're doing, will be effective if we don't first see from ourselves value in the individuals that we're serving. And I don't just mean value in, yes, everyone should be included, but value in them learning about Jesus, right? Like when I first went to that church back at Lamb's Farm with all those residents, and they thought Paul was the Apostle Paul, it opened my eyes to the faith lives of individuals with intellectual disabilities, and we're ignoring that. And in fact, sometimes I feel like we focus a little bit too much on all the reasons why it's hard to have disability ministry and all the reasons how to do it, instead of, hey, this is an unreached people group, just like the missionaries that we support, right? They still have a need to know Jesus and to learn about Jesus, and our job is to remove the barriers that are preventing them from getting there. So value is a big thing. I'll talk a little bit tonight, more specifically about my daughter and how you raise a value. Most of the churches that I work with around the nation, the question comes up, how do I raise the value of disability ministry? Our church leaders, they don't get it, they're not jumping on it. And one of the biggest ways you can increase value is through visibility, right? If you make something visible, it shows that you value it. But I want to be really clear that we're raising the value then of a program, of a ministry, not of people with disabilities. Their value, that's determined. That is God-given, that is done. But the awareness and the visibility of this ministry and this people group that is so often overlooked is what we really want to focus on. And if you're a leader in your church, what you do on the stage really shows what you value. And so that's just something to consider. A new thing we started doing at our church is having some of our Willow friends host, be the ones to do a prayer or be on the worship team and just be fully integrated and not visible for the sake of visibility, but visible because if we have a worship team, there's somebody with a disability happens to love to sing, they're on it. And same with reading scripture and all the different things. They're integrated into the full life of the church. Okay, so value, and then enduring. So, this is the right side, but enduring means to stick it out, stay together, stay the course. And we see that with these 5 friends, right? They met barrier after barrier after barrier, and they just kept going. And my favorite part about that is that they did it together. They kept going together. And that's what I loved about what the pastor said last night about how after having his daughter, he learned the importance of community. And the American culture, the Korean culture is very, appreciates independence and appreciates things that we can do for ourselves. And we like to do things for ourselves and be the helpers, but not ask for help. But these 5 friends show that when we work together with the person with special needs, with a disability of some kind, that's how we can be most effective in bringing them to the feet of Jesus. I think what's important about this is it's a mind shift. And so if we, let's see if I have this on here. These are the 4 things. It's a mind shift, and if we don't change the way we view, then we are still saying, I'm so sorry, and we're still saying, we can't serve your child. But if we can change, I'm so sorry, to congratulations, and instead of saying we can't serve you, saying, oh, tell me more about it. Like, does he need would a buddy help? Or what kind of things, I love what Doc said, like what does he love to do? What are things that he enjoys? So that we can make the whole experience here, the whole purpose of coming here, removing barriers and getting all of us to the feet of Jesus so that we can experience who Jesus is. And the thing that's interesting about disability ministry is the only minority group that you can become part of at any time. Anytime somebody can have an accident, you can have a baby. So that's a very unique thing to disability ministry. The other thing is that it doesn't fit in a box. I have spent more time in meetings trying to figure out, should it be under children's ministry or under a compassion ministry or the justice ministry? It doesn't even matter. It doesn't fit in one box because there are people with disabilities all ages, right? And unfortunately, it almost always starts in the kids' ministry simply because that's where the urgent is. And I will say that a lot of the coaching I give now is trying to get it out from under kids' ministry so that it can be a value that stands alone in your church, because it's not just for kids. And those kids grow up. I want to hear most from parents is when the kids are little and cute and they're a little bit easier to include, but then as they get older, and then the bus stop's coming at 22 because in the United States, that's when services end. There's nothing. There's nothing for them. And if there isn't a church community or some other kind of place where they can belong and serve and volunteer and use their gifts, it can become a very lonely life. And so, try not to fit it into any one box. The other thing is that it affects the entire family dynamic, as we learned last night too. And that's what I loved about the experiences I had at Johnny and Friends and Gigi's, just seeing how the entire family is dynamically touched when there's a person with a disability. So much so that there was a study done, I just looked it up, I want to say it was maybe 8 years ago, maybe 10 now, on siblings. So on the brother or sister of somebody with special needs. And the study was trying to find out what was the #1 influencer of their faith, of their relationship with God, when you have a brother or sister with special needs. And some of the common ones that you would think were in the top 5, things like how they received the diagnosis and how it affected their parents, if it was when the brother or sister was older or younger, how much medical attention that sibling needed, and then how much that it was perceived that attention was taken away from them to give towards the brother or sister with special needs. But the surprise that came out of the study was the number one influencer of their faith was how their church interacted with their brother or sister. So it wasn't how their church cared for them, it was how their church welcomed or included or didn't their brother or sister. And it became this, you might have heard of it, the study blew up because it showed that we can be pouring into the lives of our teenagers and our middle schoolers and really wanting them to know Jesus before they become independent adults. But if we're ignoring their brother or sister with a disability, then that is speaking way louder than what we're doing with them. And so the stakes are really high, right? Because we're not talking just about this person. We're talking about the entire family. And the way that church responds to a person with special needs speaks volumes to that entire family and actually affects the entire faith life of the sibling, as demonstrated by this study. And we know that, right? We know that the stakes are high. That's why we're here. And that's why I feel encouraged even as I look out in this room. And yesterday, several of you came up to me and said you were praying for me and praying for Everly, knowing my story last year. And I just so appreciated it. That is the 5 friends. That is us doing ministry together. And I just want to say that, as the storyline is the same as those 5 friends that are removing physical barriers to get to the feet of Jesus. And we're doing the same thing. We're just using different tools because the barriers are different, right? That the barriers now are more sensory or cultural. Then we're not using knives and sticks and rope, hopefully. And instead, we're using sensory tools and training. Training is a big piece of it for the small group leaders, for the staff, for the leaders. But that is how we can remove barriers. And when we do that, our faith communities become transformed because if more families have the experience that I had, where it is a joy to have Everly, and there's fear, so much fear, but it's right-sized fear, right? It's not fear that filters everything I view about her. Then our communities would just be transformed because God's goodness is so much more accessible. When I see Hannah sitting right here, she used to be in Willow Friends for years. And I was sitting here looking over my speech this morning and I heard this voice and I was like, is that Hannah? And then meeting Abigail and having her come and read, this is the kind of joy that the rest of that we're missing if we're not including this very, very important group in our churches and our communities. And isn't it just like God to say that the weakest are the most indispensable? And I love that flip of the weakness is actually the superpower. And so you're going to learn so much today from so many different things, but I just want to encourage you with the fact that I see us as these 5 friends, being fearless, being innovative, seeing value, and enduring together. And so as a co-worker with you, thank you. And as a mother of a baby with Down syndrome now, sitting on the other side of the table, which I'll talk about a little bit tonight, I just want to say thank you too for showing up and wanting to be that inclusive person in your communities as well. So thank you.